We engineer our modern world for perfect stability. We optimize supply chains, smooth out market fluctuations, and build rigid networks designed to eliminate unpredictability. But when a truly unexpected event strikes, that rigid optimization becomes the exact reason the system shatters. This graph tracks two opposing mathematical responses to volatility. The flat line represents our standard, highly optimized systems, what we call a short volatility payoff. It yields a steady baseline, but suffers catastrophic downward spikes when shocks occur. The second line is a long volatility payoff. It experiences constant minor dips and chaotic variations, but captures exponential upward spikes. Understanding the mechanics of these two lines requires a structural framework developed by risk engineer Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He categorizes all systems into three distinct states of risk. The first state is fragile. A fragile system requires peace and predictability. It breaks when subjected to disorder. The second state is robust. A robust system simply resists shocks. It survives volatility, but it remains entirely unchanged by it. The third state is antifragile. This is a mathematical and structural condition where a system actively requires volatility, stress, and disorder to grow. Without unpredictable stressors, an antifragile system degrades. By continuously pursuing absolute stability and removing localized stress, we do not prevent rare catastrophic events, often called black swans. We mathematically guarantee that when they arrive, the system lacks the adaptive capacity to survive them. This graph models fragility as a measurable mathematical property. The x-axis represents the size of a stressor, and the y-axis represents the payoff or harm. The resulting curve is concave. Harm does not scale at a linear 1-to-1 ratio with the stressor. Instead, the damage accelerates disproportionately as the size of the event increases. Consider the biological physics of a fall. A human can survive 10 separate falls from a height of 1 meter with zero permanent harm, but a single fall from 10 meters is lethal. The total distance is the same, but the harm accelerates along the curve. The physics hold true for impact. Striking a surface with 100 separate 1-pound pebbles produces a negligible effect. Dropping a single 100-pound stone shatters the target. We can measure this acceleration of harm in economic structures without needing to predict specific future events. This is called the second derivative test for model error. If a corporation experiences a 10% drop in sales, it might lose $100 million. If a 20% drop results in a $500 million loss, the damages are accelerating far faster than the stressor. Fragility is not a qualitative feeling of weakness. It is this exact, measurable, structural acceleration of harm resulting from unpredictable stressors. This chart illustrates a mathematical property known as Jensen's inequality. It proves that for convex, antifragile functions, the variability of an input yields a higher payoff than the exact median average of that input. If a person spends an entire week at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, they are perfectly comfortable. If they spend half the week at 0 degrees and the other half at 140 degrees, the mathematical average is exactly 70 degrees. However, that extreme variance results in biological death. This demonstrates a critical divide in systems architecture. Mechanical systems, like an engine, wear out predictably with use. Organic systems, like a muscle or an immune system, actively require environmental variance and stress to trigger adaptation. A grazing cow consumes a steady, predictable stream of calories, experiencing zero metabolic randomness. A lion experiences extreme variance, alternating between days of near starvation and the massive caloric influx of a successful kill. Human biology evolved to process the lion's variance. Under the constant, smoothed caloric input of the modern diet, human metabolic health degrades. It is starved of the episodic stress required to signal the body to repair and strengthen itself. Attempting to optimize organic systems into smooth, predictable states deprives them of essential data. It actively removes the environmental stress signals required for their survival. Within complex biological or economic networks, we cannot trace linear cause and effect relationships. This inability to see how one variable impacts another across a dense web is known as causal opacity. Relying purely on historical data in these opaque networks leads to the turkey problem. A turkey fed perfectly for 1,000 days will mathematically extrapolate that the butcher loves turkeys. Day 1001 is Thanksgiving. The model's smooth historical data blinded it entirely to the massive downside event. To construct a macro system that avoids the turkey problem, a strict structural trade-off must occur. For the overarching system to adapt and grow, its individual microcomponents must remain fundamentally fragile and completely expendable. The restaurant industry operates exactly this way. Individual restaurants go bankrupt constantly due to shifting consumer tastes or poor management. These continuous, localized failures force the broader culinary ecosystem to relentlessly adapt and improve. The modern banking sector operates in reverse. By artificially suppressing small failures and bailing out individual fragile institutions, regulators attempt to eliminate volatility. Preventing small, localized fires within an opaque system does not eliminate risk. It silently accumulates combustible material within the architecture until an uncontrollable, catastrophic firestorm becomes mathematically inevitable. Navigating networks where predictive modeling is impossible requires a specific architectural approach known as optionality. You structure decisions to capture the mathematically infinite upside of uncertainty while strictly capping the maximum possible downside risk. The philosopher Thales of Miletus proved this in antiquity. He paid a small, fixed cost to reserve the rights to local olive presses before the harvest. He risked almost nothing, but when an unpredictable bumper crop arrived, he held a monopoly and captured massive profits. This visual model shows how we map this concept into a modern portfolio using the barbell strategy. It is a bimodal risk allocation, entirely rejecting moderate predictions. On one end, you place 90% of capital into vessels perfectly impervious to black swan events. This guarantees the survival of the entity, regardless of market shocks or predictive failures. On the other end, you deploy the remaining 10% into highly speculative, high-convexity options. The maximum potential loss is strictly known and capped at that 10%, but the upside is unbound. The empty center of the barbell represents the mediocre middle. Relying on moderate risk and average predictions leaves a system fully exposed to catastrophic negative convexity when the predictive model inevitably fails. In academia, there is a pervasive assumption that formalized theoretical models drive practical innovation. This is the fallacy of lecturing birds how to fly. Historically, breakthrough technologies emerge from heuristic tinkering and relentless trial and error by practitioners. Academics and theoreticians typically arrive only after the fact to formalize the math behind what already works. This empirical approach leads to via negativa, or subtractive epistemology. In deeply complex systems, we cannot definitively calculate what is perfectly right, but we can definitively identify and remove what is wrong. In medicine, harm caused by the healer is called iatrogenics. Applying via negativa proves that removing elements like debt, smoking, or redundant data is mathematically safer and more effective than adding unproven interventions with hidden side effects. True systemic improvement rarely comes from engineering complex additions. It requires aggressively subtracting unnatural fragilities from the architecture. We can measure the true robustness of a system through the Lindy effect. This structural law states that for non-perishable entities, every single day of survival actively increases their future life expectancy. Time functions as a mathematical proxy for volatility and disorder. It operates as a blind filter, ruthlessly destroying fragile ideas and technologies while ignoring those that are robust or antifragile. Modern, heavily engineered concepts often lack the capacity to absorb shocks. In contrast, ancient tools, architectures, and heuristics have survived centuries of unpredictable stressors. A book or philosophy that has survived 3,000 years of stress testing is mathematically guaranteed to outlast a newly published management theory, simply because it has already absorbed thousands of black swan events without breaking. History is not driven by the brilliance of forward-looking predictive models. It is shaped by the relentless filter of time, executing trial and error at scale. There is one final ethical mechanism required for system survival: skin in the game. An anti-fragile operator absorbs both the successes and the failures of their actions. Modern bureaucrats and bankers violate this law. They capture the financial upside of volatility, but transfer the concave downside risk to the public. Looking across biology, economics, and physics, the complete model becomes clear. Antifragility is the baseline mechanical driver of evolutionary progress. The operational directive is simple: cease all attempts to achieve frictionless optimization. Instead, intentionally expose systems to capped, minor stressors to force adaptation. By abandoning the illusion of perfect prediction and building structurally anti-fragile networks, the chaos meant to destroy us becomes the exact fuel required for exponential growth.